called. The root of Vayakhel, and he called, is kahal. The word kahal is the word to call. You call them to come in. Those of you probably remember when our moms would call us in for supper. You know, they'd call us in for supper. Sometimes they would have the little triangle, and you know, you've seen that, you know, and they do the triangle, and you come home, you assemble. That's the sound of assembly, to come. It's time for supper. This word here, 200 years before Yeshua was born, the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek. Now, it is of vital importance for us who are believers in Yeshua, especially that have grown up in the Christian church. We've grown up in the Christian church, and we've learned a lot of words in English, and the English, especially the King James, has always changed a lot of the Hebrew words, not translating them, sometimes transliterating them, and sometimes, which is the worst of it, actually giving other words from Old English that have nothing to do with the biblical verse. And so it's up to us today to become archaeologists in words and actually do some word archaeology, linguistic archaeology, as I call it, and learn what these words are originally. And if you were to do that, sometimes I would think I would like to have a Bible, especially what has been miscalled the Old Testament, with the King James English translations that they use in the New Testament in the Old Testament. You would actually look at it and say, wait a second, it's one testament. The reason it's two testaments today started with Marcion back in 135 after Yeshua died. But one of the problems we also have is that the New Testament has a whole set of words that the Old Testament has, but the same word are translated different ways. And so everybody thinks that's one way. This is one way, another way. No. Let's start with this word right here, Vayakhel. The word Vayakhel is the word kahal, which means to call. Now that version that was translated 200 years before Yeshua, think of it, 200 years before Yeshua, the Hebrew Bible was translated from Hebrew to Greek. What did the Greek word use? This is called the Septuagint. And I would encourage every one of you not only to study Hebrew, but to study Greek. In fact, in all my studies, I've studied more years of Greek than I have of Hebrew. In most seminaries, Bible schools, and all the schools that I've been to, they always teach more Greek than they do Hebrew. And so it is incumbent upon every one of you young men that will become pastors and teachers that you not only study Hebrew, but you study Greek. Because that first translation from Hebrew to Greek, 200 years, called the Septuagint, has so much words, and the Greek of the New Testament, and I'm using those terms because that's kind of the mindset that we have grown up with. The Greek of the New Testament is not classical Greek. The Greek of the New Testament is Septuagint Greek. We call it Koine today, common Greek. But the Greek of the Septuagint became the common Greek that was spoken throughout the whole world since the time of Alexander the Great, about 300 years before Yeshua. And that Greek that we call the Septuagint, that translation, this translation of the 70, they translated and they used words that Yeshua used, but why don't they use the same words in the King James Version? The word kachal means to call. The word in Greek to call is kaleo. Kaleo, to call. And in the New Testament Greek, we have a Bible in the Greek. It uses the word for kachal over here, the word ecclesia. Now, for those of you that are Spanish speakers, ecclesia sounds a lot like what? Iglesia. The Spanish word iglesia, because the Spanish comes from the Latin, and one of the things that they did, apart from the King James, is that the Latin was closer to the Greek than the King James was. And so the word ecclesia, iglesia, is the perfect translation for kachal. Because the word Vayakhel, and he called, in the Greek is ecclesia. Ek, out, kachal, kaleo, out, to call out, or to what? Assemble. And he called out, and he assembled, and he ecclesiad, he iglesiad. Una iglesia es un juntamiento de los creyentes. A church should be an assembly of the believers. The problem with the word church, though, is the word church is an English word that comes from a Scottish word, actually, the word kirk. And the word kirk is the word for belonging to the Lord or belonging to a master. And from there, we got the word circle, and we got the word church, C-H-U-R-C-H, and that word means a gathering, a circle of those belonging to the Lord. The only problem is, in the King James, remember, King James is not going to the Hebrew. It's not even going to the Greek or the Latin. It's going to the Old English. And what that was a gathering of people, a circle of people to worship their lords, their gods. Stonehenge is a church. It's a circle. And that's where the Druids met to assemble for themselves. Oh, wait a second. We are not that kind of assembly. The King James mistranslated the word, and that word church, C-H-U-R, should have never come into the vocabulary. What the King James should have done is just use the word assemble. To assemble, to come together. Another word that synonym for this is also the word synagoga. The word synagoga and the word kachal, kechila, an assembly, are both synonyms of the word to gather together. And the word synagoga is not a Hebrew word. The word synagoga Synagogue, is a Greek word meaning to come together, to gather around. And so anytime you have a kehillah, you have a synagogue at the same time. It's a gathering. That's why we call this place a kehillah. We don't call this a church. This is not a church. We are not a church. We are a kehillah. We are an assembly. We are a kahal. We are a called out group, a synagogue that has gathered. A synagogue is not necessarily a building. A kehillah is not the building. The building is the building. The assembly, the kehillah, is the people that have assembled. The synagogue is the people that have assembled. In ancient times, a synagogue was also not just a building. It was the gathering place. And so wherever Hebrew people gathered, that was a synagogue. If you remember in the book of Acts, they had a synagogue when Paul goes to a town and he meets Lydia. The synagogue was at the riverside. On Shabbat morning, because remember, every ancient city was built close to a river. They didn't have plumbing. They didn't have wells. They could only go by where major water areas were. So wherever the water area was and the main street of the city was, which every city has a main street, and it usually crosses the river. Right there, you went to a new town, and you went on the Sabbath, and you were Hebrew, you were Jewish, you knew where the synagogue was, where the gathering place. You know, let's all gather at the river type of idea. Let's all synagogue, let's all gather at the river. But it comes from this word, kahal. It comes from this word to call out. Now, in the New Covenant writings, the apostolic writings, Yeshua now goes to a town in Caesarea, way up north. It's interesting that Yeshua with his disciples is around the Sea of Galilee. And then he takes him up north to a Roman town, not a Hebrew town. He takes him out of Israel, takes him to a Roman town called Caesarea Philippi. And in Caesarea Philippi, he goes there. Now, this is a very pagan town, very pagan. In fact, Caesarea Philippi was known as Banias and Banias. Either today, some people call it Banias, but it was known as Banias. Banias is the worship of the god Pan. How many have ever heard of Peter Pan? Peter Pan is the worship of the god Pan. And Pan had this desire to be worshipped by having newborn babies sacrificed to it. And there in Banias, Caesarea Philippi by the Romans, there is a big cave. And on the right side of the cave, the water gushes out of the cliff. And pure sparkling water, that is one of the headwaters. The Jordan River has 4 headwaters. That is one of the headwaters of the Jordan coming out. And right in front of this big giant cliff area, this big giant rock, you go there and you just see this giant rock and the water gushing out through here, and it forms a river, a stream and a brook, and then it goes into one of the headwaters of the Jordan. But right on the left side of where the water comes out the spring, there is a big giant cave. And you go into this cave and you look down, and in the ancient world, it was a bottomless pit. Of course, through modern times, they found out, no, it's not a bottomless pit. Actually, when you go down there, it is very, very deep. It's a crevice in the earth, and it goes very, very, very deep. But that was the place where they would get newborn babies and bring the newborn baby and toss it into the bottomless pit and into the worship of the god Pan. By the way, that's why Adonai said, you need to get rid of all the Canaanites, because they were horrific murderers of babies. They would be akin today to the abortionists. Abortionists actually have the spirit of the Canaanite religion, and abortion is the murder of children. The murder of children. And so they would murder their children into this pit. That pit was called the gate of hell, the gate of the underworld, the gate of death, the gate of sacrifice, into the god Pan. Now, think of this. Yeshua takes his 12 disciples from the Holy Land, and he takes them north about 30 miles north into a Roman town, an unclean Roman town, where the worship of Pan takes place, and he takes him there to ask him one question. Just one question. He says, who do people say that I am? Can you imagine walking 30 miles to ask a question, who do people say that I am? And so there they are, in front of this rock. There they are in Caesarea Philippi. They've made themselves unclean ritually. And he says, who do people say that I am? Well, some people say you're Elijah come back from the dead. Some people say you're John the Baptist. Some people say you're the prophet, the one that Moses prophesied about. And Yeshua said, but who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And of course, Simon says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim. By the way, that's who Yeshua is. Don't give me that idea that Yeshua is a good prophet only. Yes, he's a prophet, the prophet. Don't give me that idea, well, he was a good man. Don't give me all those things that people have today about who Yeshua is. Yeshua is the Messiah of Israel, which means the deliverer, the promised deliverer, and he's also the Son of Elohim. He is the Son of Elohim. He is the deliverer, the Messiah, the anointed one. And of course, Yeshua tells him, Peter, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you. Or Simon, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but the Father in heaven. By the way, I can never convince anyone here. I could use logic. I could do logical explanation of Yeshua being the Messiah. I could say, Yeshua claimed to be Elohim. He did. He claimed to be the Messiah. In fact, he calls himself the I Am. He said, I and the Father, Yahweh, are echad. We are one. Yeshua claimed to be Elohim. But remember, he either was Elohim or he wasn't Elohim. There's only two options, right? Either he was or he wasn't. If you say you are a dog, you are either a dog or you're not a dog. If you say, I'm the president of the United States, either you are the president or you're not the president. There's no other option. There's no halfway. Either you are or you're not. Now, if you're not who you claim to be, there's only two options. Those two options is you know you're not or you don't know you're not. There's no middle ground. If you know you're not and you claim to be, then you're a liar. If you don't know you're not who you claim to be, then you're a little loony. How many places are there where you go in and you could actually meet George Washington? There's a guy running around. Napoleon. There's all kinds of, in fact, I've heard so many people claim that they're Jesus Christ. All kinds of people claim divinity or stuff like that. But there's no middle option. Either you know you're not who you claim to be, or you don't know who you are and you don't know who, and you're loony. Now the other option on this side is if you're not, but if you are, then you have to accept that. We have to accept that. Now that's a logical understanding of Yeshua being the Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim. Either Yeshua was the Messiah or he wasn't. If Yeshua wasn't the Messiah, then he was a liar or he was a lunatic. But Peter says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim. Peter, you did not come by that by man. You know, C.S. Lewis did not have to convince you of that. By the way, that illustration comes from C.S. Lewis. You can't convince someone. Someone will always try, yeah, but this and this, and that's just the, you know. Well, wait a second. No matter how much you argue a point, never argue with people that want to argue about Yeshua. Why? Because only the Father can reveal that to them. What we need to do is really pray, Father, reveal yourself to this person. Yeshua said in another place, no one comes to me unless the Father draw them. The greatest evangelism that we could do, the primary evangelism we could do is pray for the lost. Pray for the lost. And say, Father, I pray for my cousin Joe, that you might reveal yourself to him, that you, Father, might open up his eyes. Father, help my friend Mary, help my tío Prutalco. Yo tenía un tío Prutalco. Oh, what a name, huh? O mi tía Casimira. I had a tía Casimira. Casimira means almost see. Right? Casimira. My aunt almost sees. But Father, reveal yourself to them. Now, we could give them testimony. We could give them witness of what Yeshua did to me. I always remember, you never teach theology to the lost. You tell them what Yeshua did to you. I was lost and I'm found. I was this and now I'm this, and you know, the Father had mercy on me, and by the blood of Yeshua, you know, you just seat them You put the seed of the word of Elohim in their hearts. But you never argue with them. You just seed them, and then you pray for them. You water that seed by prayer and constant prayer and constant prayer. And when a crisis comes, we believe in crisis evangelism, friendship evangelism, crisis evangelism. When a crisis comes to their life, guess who they're going to call? They're going to call you. And they're going to ask, can you tell me more? Because you didn't alienate them. You didn't argue with them. Because let me tell you, some of these guys are so logical and so smart and academic that they could probably run circles around us. That's why it's not logical, it's not right, reasonable to argue, because Adonai has a better way, and that's the power of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. And so Yeshua said to Simon, Simon, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. Therefore, you are Petros, and upon this Petra I will build my Kehillah. You are Petros, and upon this Petra I will build my Kehillah. Now what's interesting is that Yeshua gives Peter, Simon Bar Yonah. In fact, remember last week we were talking about Simon Bar Yonah. Simon, the son of John, Bar Yonah. Johnson, Simon Johnson. But he says, Simon Bar Yonah, you are Petros. You are the rock. You are rocky. And upon this Petra, I will build my Kehillah. Now, what is the difference between a Petros and a Petra? A Petros is a rock, a good solid rock. But a Petra is a rock that is a mountain. Now think of this. Here they are in Caesarea Philippi, and you go there today. How many of you been to Caesarea Philippi here? Okay. Yeah, Miguel, you've been there. I've taken you there, and some of you have been there. You go to this, it's a cliff. And there's the hole. You are the rock, and if you look at that stream, there's all kinds of boulders. Peter was a boulder. He was a rock. But upon this Petra, this giant rock, I will build my Kehillah. Well, he definitely wasn't talking about that rock. But he was talking about what Peter said, about what Peter declared. Peter declared, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim. And it is that declaration that is the foundation rock, the foundation stone, the foundation mountain of what we believe and what we follow. You are the little rock, you're the little stone. But upon this foundation, this declaration that you have said, on that my Kehillah will be built. So the assembly, the word Kehillah, now Yeshua didn't use upon this rock I will build my church. Yeshua had never even heard the word church in his human setting. He said, upon this Kehillah I will build my assembly. Upon this stone, this foundation, I will build my assembly, my kehillah. Now remember, Peter, and remember, Yeshua gives him the word Petros. Now, the word Petros in Hebrew is Cephas. Cephas, the Hebrew word Cephas. Rocky. Cephas. Notice that Yeshua doesn't use the Hebrew or the Aramaic. Yeshua uses the term Petros in Latin, in Greek. You are the Petros, and upon this Petros I will build. Upon this Petra I will build my kehillah. And the word there, kehillah, is the word ecclesia. Now, Peter, James, and John, they knew Aramaic. They knew Hebrew. Every time they read the scriptures, they read them in Hebrew. They explained it in Aramaic. Aramaic was the language of the Hebrew people at that time. But all the people there knew Greek also. They all knew Greek. Everybody, in fact, you go to Israel today, and pretty much whatever language you speak, someone speaks your language. You know, I was surprised. How many of you were surprised that all kinds of people spoke Spanish to you? You know, you go over there, all these people know Spanish. You know, all these people know French. What? Jerusalem has always been, and it is, the center of the world. And in those days, it definitely was the center of the known world. Because everyone that went from north to south to Egypt, Jerusalem and that area was the crossing points. How many of you here are multilingual, bilingual, trilingual? You know, and this morning, Mitch says, Shabbat Shalom, Buenos Dias. And then I go, Yate. Right? Right, Mitch? Yate. Yatahei. And so, you know, Mitch is trilingual. And so, you know, some of us are bilingual. We speak English and Spanish. In fact, most of us here are Hispanos, and an Hispano means someone who comes from Hispania, from Spain, and our language and our culture, our family genes come from over there. In fact, where's that at? Our sister here just gave me this paper. Women who joined Don Juan de Oñate's New Mexico settlement, the Gordejuela inspection of 1600s, a list of the women that came from Spain, or Spanish women that came with Oñate. And these are some of your grandmas. These are some of your grandmothers here for some of you ladies. And one of the things that we know is that, and I lost my train of thought. Let's go on. Adonai wants me to go back to the scriptures here. And so one of the things that we need to do here is look at this idea of ecclesia, of the called out community. Yeshua says, I will build my kehillah. I will build my assembly. I will build upon that Petra, upon that foundation stone, I will build my assembly, my gathering. Now, Peter and them, because they knew those three languages, and they were part of that culture of the Second Temple period, when Yeshua said ecclesia. Now remember, they knew Greek. They probably, many of them probably read. And I know they did because I'm going to share something here in a second. They probably read the Septuagint in Greek. Not only did they read the Hebrew, not only did they read the Hebrew from the Hebrew scrolls, but they read the scrolls that were written in Greek, the Septuagint. If you look at many of the verses that the apostolic writings mention, like it is written, that comes from the Greek. That comes from the Greek. So the Greek writers, the Hebrew writers of the Greek New Testament sometimes they used the Hebrew, but sometimes they used the Greek. And you could actually see in the book of Acts, for example, Luke was a Hellenistic Jew. Luke was not a Greek. He was a Greek Jew, a Jew who spoke and lived in Greek culture. Oh, this is what I was going to say. Even though we here have grown up in a Hispano culture, we've grown up Hispanic, but yet our primary language is English. Those of you that have come from Mexico, you speak Spanish, and think of that. We here have pretty much lost our Spanish. We pretty much have lost our Spanish. I've had to relearn Spanish that I grew up speaking Spanish when I was small. I'm going to reveal something to you. I flunked second grade. Can you imagine? I flunked second grade. I flunked second grade because I didn't know enough English to go on to third grade. I was a Spanish speaker, but one of the things that they did, and I don't know how many of you remember this, they used to paddle us if we spoke Spanish. Anybody remember that? You know, they would paddle. If we spoke Spanish in grade school, we would get a paddling. They forced us to speak English, and so I flunked and I learned English because I didn't want to flunk again, and I didn't want to get paddled again. And so we were forced into English speaking. Of course, now in the grade schools, they're bilingual. They teach bilingual stuff. And by the way, the New Mexico Constitution, one of the ideas of New Mexico becoming a state of the Union, that was one of the main things that the New Mexico Constitution has that no other state constitution has. That the language of New Mexico is going to be bilingual, Spanish and English. Not English and Spanish, but Spanish and English. And so for us becoming a state of the Union, that was what our ancestors said, we want this. And one of my great uncles was one of the proponents for having Spanish being spoken as a co-language, not one over the other, but as a co-language. But in the first century, everybody was like that. Yeshua spoke Hebrew. Yeshua spoke Aramaic. Yeshua spoke Greek. Everybody spoke those three languages. And little by little, Latin started coming in. By the way, all the Romans spoke Greek. The Romans did not speak Latin until after the destruction of the temples, and Latin became the language. But all the Romans spoke Greek. And over here, the Greek word, ecclesia, I will build my ecclesia. I will build my assembly. All the disciples, Peter and John and James, they knew what he was talking about. My kehillah. Because if you go back to the Hebrew Septuagint, Every time you have the word kahal, it's the word ecclesia. So a kehillah and an ecclesia are the same thing. We could call this place a kehillah. But we could also call this place an iglesia. This is an iglesia. An iglesia is not a Catholic church. An iglesia is not a Protestant church. An iglesia is a kehillah, an ecclesia. But we can't call this a church. This is not a church. We're not even in a circle. Now, sometimes we become a little circusy, but a church, an ecclesia, should never be a circus. And so the word here, and Moses assembled, back to verse 1 of chapter 35, and Moses assembled the whole community of the sons of Israel. Now he uses another word here, and he kehilad, and he eglesiad, and he ecclesiad. The whole adat. The word adat here is used. The whole adat of the sons of Israel. The word adat means a congregation. What's the difference between an ecclesia and what's the difference between an assembly and a congregation? It's synonyms. They're the same thing. But he assembled all the adat, the community, in fact, the word community and congregation and ecclesia and all these words are synonyms to one another. What's a community? Con, unitas, those that come in unity. A community is a united with each other. And over here, the word adat is the word congregation. In fact, here in town we have another ecclesia that is called Adat Yeshua. In other words, they call themselves the congregation of Yeshua, Yeshua's congregation. And in the New Covenant scriptures, every time you have the term Church of Christ. Have you heard that term, Church of Christ, in the New Covenant scriptures? The Church of God or the Church of Christ? Now, denominations today have used the term Church of God or Church of Christ. But the word there is Kehillah Elohim, for Church of God, and Kehillah HaMashiach, for Church of Christ. So Adat Yeshua is a Kehillah Yeshua, and a congregation dedicated to Yeshua. And of course, the congregations in the New Covenant writings, the book of Acts, book of Romans, all the other epistles, when it says, and the Church of God, it's the assembly of Elohim, which is us. We are the assembly of Elohim. This is a assembly of Elohim. This is a Kehillah Elohim. We are a Church of God. We're not denominationally that, but from the Hebrew point. We are a Church of Christ. Not denomination, but we are a Kehillah of HaMashiach. And so all these terms are terms that really need to be brought up again. We need to restore these terms. We need to get away from the English and restore the Hebrew terms, because we're living in the days of restoration. We're living in the days right before the coming of the Son of Man. Verse 2. And we have two parshot today. Verse 2. These are the things that Yahweh has ordered to be done. Okay, He's ordered to be done. These are the things that the commander-in-chief has ordered. These are not the things that he has suggested. These are not the things that he thinks we should do. These are not the things that he said, oh, you could do this as long as you want, and whenever it's not convenient, it's okay. No, he says these are the things that Yahweh has ordered. Not Moshe, not the Jews. These are the things that Yahweh has ordered. Now, an order is a duty whether you like it or not, right? Remember in the military? They would order us to do things. I didn't like that. But it was an order. And if I didn't do the order, then we'd have what they called in the Navy captain's mast. Captain's mast, which is, what do they do in, what do they call in the other services when you have to go before the captain or have to go to, captain's mast. These are the things that Yahweh has ordered. Work is to be done for 6 days, okay? That's an order. You have to work 6 days. By the way, it's such an order to work. You're ordered to work. In other words, there's no such thing in the Hebraic community. And notice, you might find one or maybe two, maybe 1.5 per capita. But have you ever seen any Jewish people on the corners begging for money, not working, homeless? I've never seen any. They're all Christians. They're all Christians. In fact, I've never seen no atheist begging for money. They're all Christians. You never find an atheist or agnostic begging for money. It's all Christians. How do we know that? Because on their little sign says, God bless you, with a little cross. You never say, no, God bless you. I never have you? Or you never see Elohim bless you or Hashem bless you? You never see that. You never see a Star of David. It's always a cross. Have you noticed that? From now on, check it out. Correct me if I'm wrong. But one of the things that we need to do is we are ordered to work. So every one of you here is ordered to work 6 days. We are ordered to work 6 days. That's an order. And I do not believe in giving food or money to the homeless. That won't work. I will not do that. Well, you are being not merciful. Watch what it says. Come, follow me. Go with me to 2 Thessalonians. 2 Thessalonians. Watch what it says here. Verse 10. Oh, chapter 3. Chapter 3, verse 10. And this is Paul giving some encouragement to the church in Thessalonica. And he says to them, we gave you an order, order, rule. We gave you a guideline. We gave you a decree. We gave you a rule when we were with you not to let anyone have any food if he refused to do any work. Oops. Some of their signs even say, we'll work for food. And then you tell him, would he like to come? I have some weeds to be cut. Oh no, I need to get to New York City or whatever. They won't work for food. Watch what it says. We gave you a rule when we were with you not to let anyone have any food if he refused to do any work. So none of us here, no one of you should ever go begging for food or anything. If you guys want something, especially you young people, if you want something, you better work for it. Because you're commanded to work for it. You're not commanded to get a handout. There are no handouts. Now, we have offerings. In fact, we're going to have an offering the first day of unleavened bread, where all the men come and we don't come empty-handed, and we get that money and food that comes in. We have a pantry so that we could feed every one of you that has a need. And we'll do that. And we know that every one of us comes to hard times sometimes, and sometimes our job is laid off. So, we've been laid off, or something happens. You're a widow, an orphan, someone that has need. We will help you. But we are ordered not to give any food to anyone who refuses to do any work. Now we hear that there are some of you, think of it in the congregation, some believers, there are some of you who are living in idleness, doing no work themselves but interfering in everybody else's. In our Master Yeshua the Messiah, we order you, or by the name of Yeshua the Messiah, we order you, and call on people of this kind to go on quietly working and earning the food that they eat. The food you eat should be earned, and it should be worked for. That work ethic is something that has been lost. In a welfare society, let me tell you, welfare is for those that are widowed, orphaned, those that are disabled. In fact, there are people that are widows and orphans and disabled and truly needy people that aren't getting what their needs are. Their needs aren't being met because a whole group of idle people that just want freebies are taking advantage of the system. You know what really bothers me? I live in the South Valley, what people consider a poor area of town. I love it there, lived there all my life. I will never move out of there. But you know what? I go to the Smith's there, the Price right down the corner from my house. I go there, and you go there, and there's this man or this lady with a basket load of food, junk food, and all kinds of stuff. And when they go pay with a welfare card, food stamps, ETB card. And you think they're poor. Wait a second. This guy's wearing some boots that probably cost hundreds of dollars. A hat that wore hundreds of dollars. Some of those trajes aren't cheap. They're not cheap. They're some of these guys, with jewelry, all kinds, from all kinds of different. And then you go and you're taking your basket, and they have this big giant Cadillac or this big giant truck, or wait a second. Cell phones and everything. To me, if I needed an ETB card, ETB, Echo Bravo Tango, okay. EBT, I got it. I wouldn't have a cell phone because I wouldn't have this giant car, this giant, I've never followed one to their houses. But again, that's another story. Let's go on here. Don't get me riled up. It says, we gave you a rule when we were with you not to let anyone have any food if he refused to do any work. Now we hear that some of you who are living in idleness, doing no work themselves, but interfering in everybody else's. In our Master Yeshua the Messiah, we order you to call on people of this kind to go on quietly, working and earning the food that they eat. My brothers, never get tired of doing what is right. What? Never get tired of doing what is right. If anyone refuses to obey what I have written, wow, look at that. If anyone refuses to obey what I have written in this letter, take note of him, have nothing to do with him, so that he will feel that he is in the wrong, though you are not to regard him as an enemy, but as a brother in need of correction. You know, and just one more thing, as I've talked to some of these people, I've noticed that the reason most people are homeless, there are real homeless people. There are real people, and that's why we need to support programs to help those that have a real need. But most of the people that call themselves homeless are sinners that have been kicked out of their homes, that have gotten divorced because of their sin, because of their drugs, their alcohol, their tonterias, and all kinds of stuff. There are real homeless. There's a lot of homeless people. In fact, I was just looking at the news the other day, and they're saying that in Silicon Valley, even some of the professors at some of those big universities there are homeless. Well, they live in a real nice mobile home, but they can't afford the housing in that area because of man's greed. You know, California has a lot of greed. And, you know, a house that would sell here for $100,000 over there might be $800,000, you know, or more. Greed. People's greed. And we could solve the homeless population in one way. Easy way. There's an easy solution. But the problem is sin. If we would go back to Torah and follow the Torah ways, how did the Torah deal with the poor? Yeshua said the poor you always have with you. How did they deal with the poor? They had them as called indentured servants. They had them living there, taking care of their property, and the Bible solves it. But because of today's culture, because of the abuse of the indentured servants, because of the abuse of slavery, that's been kicked out. So without that, we have a homeless population. Let's go back. Ya se acabó. Just one more thing. Please bear with me. Just one more thing. Here in Exodus, where were we? 35. Exodus 35. I'm just going to say one more thing, and then I'll let you guys go for your pozole and menudo and all that kind of stuff. It goes on to say that work is to be done for 6 days. But the seventh day is to be a holy day, a kadosh day, a separate day for you, a day of complete rest, consecrated to Yahweh, not consecrated to the Jews or to the Christians, to Yahweh, is to be a holy day. And whoever does any work on that day shall be put to death. You must not light a fire on the Sabbath day, or you must not kindle a fire, actually it says, in the Sabbath day in any of your homes. Remember last week we talked about the Sabbath? Last week the Parsha had to do with the Sabbath. This week we have another back-to-back Sabbath instruction. Maybe Adonai, maybe somebody didn't listen last week. And Adonai says this week, you know what? The Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath. Work, work, work. 6 days, work. But the seventh, take it easy. You know, we work 5 days and do double work on the last 2. On Saturday and Sunday, we do double work. No, wait a second. That's not the way it should be. Yeah, you should go to work 6 days. But the seventh is a day of complete rest. They collect the money, a teruma, an offering. In closing, I want to make an announcement. This is an announcement. We have 2 kinds of envelopes in the back. 2 kinds of envelopes. One is called a tither envelope, and the other one is called an offering envelope. The tithing envelope is for your tithes. A tithe, according to Leviticus 27:32, is a tenth of all your earnings is holy to Yahweh. A tenth of your earnings is holy to Yahweh. So a tenth of what you get, Adonai sets it aside spiritually. Doesn't matter if you set it aside, but a tenth of whatever you get, Adonai sets it aside. Sets it aside. Sets it aside. Sets it aside. Every week he sets it aside. And all of a sudden, Adonai uses what he set aside and what you set aside as the way to bless you. And if he sets this much aside and you only set this much aside, then guess what? The blessing is going to go down. He's going to put holes in your pocket. And all of a sudden, you take your keys out of your pocket and that $100 bill that you were going to use to get is going to be lost, gone. All kinds of ways. But if what he set aside and what you set aside, if that matches, then he's going to bless you. Now, an offering is above the tithe. 10% is your duty. You have to. That's an obligation. Now, an offering is what you want to give above the tithe. You cannot give an offering unless you tithe first. If you give an offering of $100, of $500, or whatever you want every week, you've never tithed. An offering is not a tithe. An offering is not a tithe. This does not come into play until this has been, fulfilled. So when you give your tithes and offering, remember, no congregation should ever ask for funds or even have fundraisers if everybody tithed. The only reason we have to have fundraisers is because not everybody tithes. Only about 8% of a congregation tithes. And I'm not talking just here, I'm talking overall. A small part tithes. This congregation is run on the tithes of a small little group. And I thank you. You guys have been faithful. But most people, what they do is they just give offerings. We cannot live, no congregation, I'm not talking about this, I'm talking about every congregation you go to. A congregation cannot live on offerings. And so we welcome your tithes and your offerings, but remember there's a difference between the tithe and the offering. We were going to talk about the next verse here, it has to do about the offerings, the teruma. But verse 3 has to go for another week. Let's stand. Adonai, we thank you for where you led us today. We thank you for the body, this assembly. I thank you for this ecclesia. This is this assembly here, Father, is the ecclesia of Yeshua. I will build my ecclesia. I will build my kehillah, Yeshua said. And Father, look what Yeshua has built. People, your assembly, your kadosh, and that we may be able to, out of this place, do a mighty work. Yeverechecha Yahweh va'ish merecha. Ayir Yahweh panavelecha vihunecha. Asa Yahweh panavelecha.